With Bernie Sanders' campaign sinking as Joe Biden ascends, Americans may be tempted to think that authoritarian socialism is on the decline. But could Biden be ideally placed to grow the size of government even more than Bernie in light of the coronavirus and the coming market crash? Stay tuned to find out on the Today with 2 Cents podcast. Hello, everyone. This is My 2 Cents, and welcome back to the Today with 2 Cents podcast. On the last episode of this podcast, we discussed the coronavirus outbreak in light of the Austrian business cycle. And I suggested that the media hysteria about coronavirus is likely part of a larger scheme for having something to blame as the Fed desperately attempts to continue propping up our bubble economy by continuing to cut interest rates, expanding the currency supply. Now, just as I predicted, the Fed has, you guessed it, continued to cut interest rates. And of course, they're blaming it on the coronavirus. We just have no choice. The economy was doing great, but the coronavirus is slowing things down, so we have to keep cutting rates. Yeah, get real. We always knew you were going to keep doing it to stave off the economic collapse that was coming, coronavirus or not. And of course, despite the Fed cutting these rates, the market is beginning to tank. And this is to be expected, because at the end of the day, the Fed can manipulate the currency supply all it wants. What really determines the health of the economy is the amount of goods and services that are available. And as supply suffers due to the fact that many supply chains are being shut down thanks to coronavirus, people are starting to realize that the goods and services that their financial assets supposedly represent aren't really there. But it's worse than that, because this economic collapse was inevitable. Coronavirus might turn out to be the straw that breaks the camel's back, but in reality, everything was already overvalued thanks to the Fed constantly expanding the currency supply. And when that market sell-off comes, as it inevitably does, everybody realizes their assets aren't really worth as much as they thought they were because the supplies they needed aren't really there. Now, this brings us to the topic of the upcoming presidential election and Joe Biden's recent victories, which have, for a while, it looked like Bernie was going to be the front runner, but now Biden is. But first, before we talk about that, I need to take a moment to say thank you to Specter Defense and Weaponry for sponsoring this podcast. Specter Defense is an online arms dealership run by Nate McLaughlin. He specializes in and accepts commissions for customized firearms, swords, knives, etc. And he is also hoping to reverse engineer many high-tech firearms and share their blueprints online. If he makes enough on Patreon, he also plans to buy a metal 3D printer. So if you're interested in acquiring a custom arms commission or just want to support his work, please check out SpecterDefenseandWeaponry.com, link in the description. And thank you to Specter Defense for sponsoring the show. So, getting back to the issue of the upcoming election. Joe Biden now appears to be the Democratic frontrunner. Every other candidate from Buttigieg, how do you pronounce that, to Bloomberg, has dropped out and endorsed Biden. And of course, the running media narrative is all the other candidates decided that Bernie is too extreme. He's an outright communist, and the American people will never elect him. And if we don't rally behind a more moderate candidate like Biden, Trump is going to win re-election. Now, the DNC is probably correct in that assessment. And a lot of right-wing political figures are now saying, well, this is good, because better to run the risk of a Biden presidency than a Sanders presidency. I mean, Biden, he's a standard Keynesian crony capitalist Democrat, but Bernie, he's an outright socialist. Between the two of those, the lesser of two evils is clearly Biden, and we'd rather risk a Biden presidency than a Sanders presidency. And there's a lot I could say about that, but let me make my prediction about what's coming up in the near future and what the media narrative is going to be. I do predict that Biden is going to become the frontrunner. And as the Fed continues to cut interest rates, desperately trying to prevent the pending economic collapse, they are not going to be able to. It's anyone's guess how long they're going to be able to stave it off, but there will be a recession by the time the 2020 election takes place. And Trump will claim that this is entirely the fault of the coronavirus. He's the greatest president with the greatest economy ever. And it's just this horrible coronavirus that threw us into this economic downturn. Now, Biden, on the other hand, is going to claim that coronavirus is merely the catalyst that sparked the recession. And he'll actually be right about that point. But then the follow-on part of his narrative is going to be the real reason the economy is doing so poorly is because of Trump's tax cuts and lack of government regulation, unfettered free market capitalism. Now, both Trump and Biden are going to be wrong, but the trouble that we're in comes from the monetary system itself. But of course, the average voter won't know that, and the mainstream media isn't going to give it any airtime. Now, also, I should say, I happen to agree that Biden is probably more electable than Sanders, which means that come election day, we might find ourselves in a situation where a lot of Americans are out of a job thanks to the recession, and they're going to be hearing Biden claim this recession was due to lack of regulation, markets being too free. If I'm elected, I promise to pass regulations that will protect your jobs and ensure that a crash like this never happens again. And for those of you who are old enough to remember, just think back to what Obama's platform was in 2008, right after the 2008 housing crisis. I think that's exactly what Biden's going to do this time around, and it just might work. Because the average American voter does not understand the Austrian business cycle, and they're going to go right along with it. Biden, he's promising to fix our situation, get us jobs back. Why not elect him? And the moment he gets into office, he's going to push for draconian market regulations and an expansion of government, perhaps to the levels of extremity that one would have expected from Bernie Sanders. Because you have to remember, Biden may sell himself as the moderate candidate, but at the end of the day, Sanders is just the one who's the most honest about it. They're all left-wing, and ultimately they're moving towards government of increasingly greater regulation and control over the lives of its citizens. Now, not that the Republican Party's any better, but we're just talking about the Democratic platform for now. So the point I'm trying to make is that for those people who are saying that it's a good thing that Biden has overtaken Bernie, because Biden's policies will be less economically restrictive than Bernie's, don't be so sure. Whether it's Biden or Bernie, I guarantee you that in the coming months, the Democratic narrative is going to be, we are in a recession because of the lack of regulation and tax cuts from Donald Trump. Elect me, and I'll create a protected economy that works for everyone. And Trump could potentially have had a way to counter this, but because he so foolishly insisted on taking credit for the economic boom that was really the result of the Fed pushing us into a bigger and bigger bubble, he's not going to be able to offer any meaningful counter narrative. He went on for months about how this is the greatest economy ever and it's all thanks to him. And then lo and behold, a little coronavirus throws us into a crazy economic recession. And because he insisted on taking the credit when he could have said, we are in a bubble, I inherited it from Obama, and there's nothing stopping the coming economic collapse, then he might have had a leg to stand on. But now, he's going to have nothing. The economy will be suffering, and he's going to look like an idiot. And all the disgruntled workers who have lost their jobs amidst the recession will elect the Democratic nominee, and then boom, sweeping economic restrictions and government expansion will follow. I could be wrong, but that is my prediction as of now. But I want to hear what you guys think. What do you think Joe Biden's prevailing narrative is going to be? Do you think the Fed is going to be able to stave off the economic collapse till after the election? Or what are your thoughts? Be sure to put them in the comments below. Anyways, enough time for chit chat. Let's get to the weekly hottie. Drum roll, please. This week's weekly hottie is Anjui Tacho. Tahoe. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Anyways, here she is. All right, that's it for this week. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth. Thanks everyone for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, as well as hit the bell to receive notifications so that you never miss an upload. And if you're a fan of my channel, please consider supporting me on Subscribestar, Bitbacker, or Patreon to receive special rewards. All links can be found in the About section of my website, my2centsvideos.com.